Thank you, Design Indaba, for allowing me to share the stage with these amazing creatives, designers, artists, but more importantly, thank you all for being here, because you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're here in Cape Town, so thank you. My background as an architect and filmmaker has allowed me to work at many different scales of thinking. When you begin to think about the future, specifically myself as an artist and filmmaker, I've been exploring cinema as a form of research to speculate on what I like to call myths of the near future. One of the most important lessons I have learned is to actually question the gaze we all look through when we begin to imagine tomorrow. Will the future look like this? A scene from Blade Runner 2049, or will we be interacting with technology like in Minority Report, or will we fall in love with our devices like in Her? As these films begin to talk about larger narratives that talks about challenges that we all face today, I believe that we should be incorporating rituals and culture as essential parts of storytelling that tell stories about the future. This lesson was actually passed down by my father. As you can see clearly, he was a builder. And he would not hesitate to tell you about all the ways he could construct a wall. But I like to believe he was more than just a builder. He was more like a builder of ideas. He had a great relationship with not just thinking outside the box, but in creating meaning through the things he was making. In this photo, he stands in front of a Subodh Gupta sculpture that's entitled, "What Does the Vessel Contain That the River Does Not?" When I took this photo, he was telling me the story of when he brought home this computer, this old, very old computer. And I showed him this photo, and I told him I was going to tell you about it. And he said, "You should tell that story," so I will. So one day, my father brings his computer home. And he sits it right in between a large sub-bass speaker that was as tall as I was at the time, and a hand-sculpted bust of a black woman that looked very similar to a Gene Pearson sculpture. You got to imagine at that time, having a computer was similar to like being on a train at night and opening the window and allowing fresh air to blow in. It gave you a new sense of the world, a new view to look out of. It gave me an opportunity to just search for ideas and just continue my own research personally. So my father then tells me to plug it in, so I plug it in. And then he tells me to install this software, so I install the software. He then asked me to design a shed. So I don't tell him no, obviously. And he pulls out a piece of paper and starts to outline that shed. And on the computer, I start to click enough buttons to figure out how to draw a wall. And then I drew a roof. And then I drew a door. See, this was my first lesson in understanding the power of narrative through drawing, through image making. I think this was a very important lesson for me as I started to ask more questions. Like, we all know a shed is mostly functional, right? You put tools in it. But at that time, what I really thought about was what its greatest purpose was. Like, if we think about a house, what's the purpose of a house? Or when we think of a sculpture like pavilion, what is the purpose of this pavilion? Or when we think about music and the power that music has that can move bodies like bodies of water, what is that purpose? And what happens when we combine this with the frequency of film? I believe we can begin to tell stories and fill in gaps of conversations that we were afraid to have before. So I'm really interested in the invisible, the stories of subcultures, mythology, and folklore that has shaped our world for so long. And I want to figure out how to actually bring this and bridge this to film. So I decided to move to LA, where I joined a one-year postgraduate program in an architecture school. And in this program, I was allowed to direct this film entitled Earth Mother, Sky Father. Early on in the process, we talked about manufacturing electronics, these devices that we use every single day. Early on, I understood that my job as an artist and director was to figure out how I can tell you guys that these devices have a greater meaning as they sit in our pockets and sit in our hands. As most people are unaware of how these devices are even manufactured, from the factories where Chinese workers are assembling these many parts and machines, to the rare earth that's being collected in factories, from the shores of China to Africa, from the hands of the people that actually dig up these minerals. See, this is the side of the screen that we don't see. I then ran across an article in the New York Times that said, what if we could harness this desperation for new technologies to desperate need to curb the killing in Central Africa? They say you should never ask a question with another question, but I decided to ask, what if we could tell a new story of hope and faith in the technology of tomorrow? One that puts the stories of ritual and culture at the forefront of a new techno future. So I was really excited about Kuba culture, found in the DRC, and how they would weave these highly technological fabrics and garments that they would not only wear on their bodies, but you would see it in their architecture, and how mythologies and stories have helped shape their world and how it can shape ours. So I then found a quote by Octavia Butler, the famous author and writer. She said, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change." So then this allowed me to create a film and a story about a changing and shifting power over the earth, where our bodies once only occupied the surface, only understood the geology, but through ceremonies and masquerades, we can begin to build deeper relationships to the people of the Congo, to machines, and to God through performance. As the story takes place in a mined landscape once used for excavation of rare earth minerals, it now sits as an ancestral ground where Woot, an excavation programmer, dances with the God of rare earth to heal the land of centuries of scars. In this film, Africa is now in control of its own minerals. In this story, excavation programmers are spread across the continent as they watch over the land. And now there's no separation between the spirit and the Congolese people, and there's a new renewable energy that is guided by the spirit and that is connected to ceremony and rituals. I like to use these three ideas, science fiction, Afrofuturism, and black cinema, as a way to talk about bigger ideas of alienation, the spirit, automation, artificial intelligence, to really allow us to see black bodies in future spaces. And I like to think of artists like Rem LZ, who didn't just create worlds, but he was really good at just living in them. As he was known as one of the most prominent graffiti artists in New York, to rewriting the alphabet through algorithms, to creating the most elaborate costumes made of reclaimed trash. I like to believe I'm operating in the same lines of artists like Rem LZ and like writers like Octavia Butler, who when she began her own writing, she thought that she didn't have the power or the gift to actually give anything to the world, so she started writing. And now her work is an amalgamation of subcultures. It's a speculative world building that challenges our view of the world for the better. The film looks at a deeper evolution of mythology through objects, through dance, through music, through ideas of automation and artificial intelligence, challenging the viewer to look beyond the post-apocalyptic and the white male gaze, but to begin to explore new notions of ritual through the musicality that black bodies possess all over the world. Like my father, we all are laborers of that vision of tomorrow. I believe that vision is only idea until we can begin to build futures that involve the mythic, the black, and the underrepresented in its horizons. You can watch Earth, Mother, Sky, Father on Nowness, so check it out. Thank you all.
Yeah, Congratulations. That was powerful.
Thank you.